For almost 60 years, the entire Bigfoot mystery rested on fragments. Oversized footprints pressed into mud, strange calls recorded deep in the forest, stories told by hunters who insisted they had seen something walking between the trees, and of course, less than 1 minute of shaky film captured beside Bluff Creek in 1967. There was always something missing, a body. Because photographs can be manipulated, footprints can be carved, witnesses can be mistaken. But a body would be different. A body would have bones, organs, teeth, fingerprints, blood, and DNA. It could be measured, scanned, dissected, and compared with every known species on Earth. A body would end the argument. And in the summer of 2025, visitors entering the Great New York State Fair were told that the wait was finally over. Inside a darkened exhibition space, beneath glass, lay an enormous hair-covered figure. It was stretched across a coffin-like platform, surrounded by theatrical lighting and the sounds of something growling in the darkness. It was not a photograph. It was not a footprint. It was presented as the complete preserved body of a Bigfoot. The creature had a name, Dack, and the man standing behind the exhibit claimed he had carried it out of the Adirondack wilderness. He called himself Charles Snake. According to Snake, this discovery had not happened by accident. He described himself as an experienced Bigfoot hunter who had spent years returning to the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. He believed the creatures moved through remote wetlands, forests, and cave systems, appearing only briefly before disappearing again. Traditional methods, he said, did not work. Cameras were too obvious. Campfires announced the presence of humans. Large groups made too much noise. So Snake claimed that he had developed a quieter method of entering the wilderness and remaining there without attracting attention. In the fall of 2024, he returned to the Adirondacks. The story he later told begins with sound. Snake said he played recordings of unexplained howls into the forest. At some point, something answered. He followed the direction of the response, moving deeper into the air. Then he noticed the smell. It was not simply the smell of wet soil or an animal somewhere nearby. Snake described the odor as the unmistakable stench of decomposition. He moved toward it and eventually found what he believed was the body of an enormous, human-like creature lying on the forest floor. It was already dead. There was no dramatic confrontation, no hunter raising a weapon, no final photograph of the creature standing between the trees. The greatest discovery in the history of cryptozoology was supposedly lying motionless on the ground. Snake claimed the body measured approximately 8 feet tall and weighed around 300 pounds. It was covered with thick hair but appeared disturbingly human in its proportions. He said there were additional footprints near the body, suggesting that the dead creature may not have been alone. There was no obvious explanation for its death. And from that moment, the story took a direction almost no scientific discovery normally takes. Snake did not immediately contact a university, a medical examiner, a wildlife authority, or a forensic laboratory. There was no documented response team securing the location, no publicly established perimeter, no neutral investigator recording the position of the body before it was. Instead, Snake says the remains were taken to a garage near Saranac, New York. The body was decomposing, and according to his own account, damaged internal material had to be removed. A friend then helped him preserve what remained, using a process Snake described as something similar to taxidermy. That decision would later become extremely important. If the creature was real, the garage did not simply become a workshop. It became the location where the most valuable biological specimen ever discovered was handled, altered, and reconstructed before independent scientists could examine it. But at the time, the public had not seen any of it. For months, the alleged body remained outside mainstream attention. Then, in 2025, a website and promotional campaign appeared, announcing a discovery that promised to transform our understanding of human evolution. The creature was given the name Dack, apparently derived from the Adirondacks. The announcement described it not as an unknown ape, but as something positioned between ancient and modern humans. The language was enormous. This was supposedly the missing physical evidence that researchers had searched for across generations. And there was another claim. DNA existed. The promoter said preserved tissue, hair, blood, and other biological material had been recovered from the body. They suggested that genetic testing had connected Dack with both modern humans and archaic human populations. But the complete results were not immediately released. Instead, the body went to the fair. Visitors could enter the exhibition and see Dack through glass. The atmosphere was closer to an old American sideshow than a university laboratory. There were darkness, recorded sounds, dramatic presentation, and a story designed to make the audience wonder whether the impossible was lying only a few feet away. A pre-recorded narration by actor William Shatner played as part of the experience. Snake said he had paid Shatner to read the story he had written. The presence of a famous voice gave the presentation another layer of authority, even though Shatner's participation did not verify any of its claims. Snake later said approximately 60,000 people came to see the exhibit. That number came from the people promoting Dack rather than an independent count, but there is no question that the display attracted attention. People photographed the face. They examined the hands. They looked at the shape of the skull and the heavy hair covering the body. Some laughed. Some immediately dismissed it as a prop. Others stood in front of the glass and considered the possibility that they were looking at something real. This was the strange power of Dack. The body did not have to convince everyone. It only had to remain possible. Critics quickly pointed out that real scientific discoveries are not normally introduced beside theatrical lighting and recorded growls. Bigfoot researchers were also suspicious. Matthew Moneymaker of the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization publicly warned that the exhibit appeared to be another fabricated corpse. The Bigfoot community had seen bodies before. In 2008, two men claimed they had recovered a dead Bigfoot from the forests of Georgia. Photographs showed a dark, hairy figure inside a freezer. A press conference followed. DNA testing was promised. When the alleged body was finally examined, it turned out to be a costume filled with animal remains. A few years later, another supposed body named Hank was taken on tour. It was eventually identified as a construction made with artificial materials and animal hair. Because of that history, serious Bigfoot researchers understood what was at stake. Another false body would not simply embarrass the person presenting it. It would damage every witness and researcher who wanted unexplained evidence to be examined honestly. Snake was not discouraged. He continued defending Dack and insisted that the creature was anatomically different from a normal ape. He argued that Bigfoot had been misunderstood from the beginning. It was not an oversized gorilla, an alien, or an interdimensional being. It was something much closer to us. But if that were true, the public display created a strange contradiction. Snake said it was difficult to bring an enormous carcass into a scientific institution. Yet the same carcass had apparently been removed from the forest, transported to a garage, preserved, placed inside a custom exhibition, and carried to one of the largest state fairs in America. The body could travel. It simply was not traveling to the one place where its identity could be settled. Then the story went quiet. Dack remained known mostly within the Bigfoot community, local media, and the people who had visited the fair. Almost a year passed. And then, in June and July of 2026, the body returned. Snake began appearing in new television interviews. The story was repeated by local stations and then picked up by larger media organizations. Photographs of Dack spread again, but this time, the claim had changed. Snake no longer said that he was merely trying to raise money for future testing. He said the test had already been completed. According to Snake, samples had been examined through a connection with a veterinary DNA laboratory at Cornell University. He claimed that Dack's teeth had also been studied, and that the creature was probably in its late teens or early 20s when it died. He now spoke with certainty. Dack, he said, was not an unknown great ape. It was a human hybrid. If this claim were true, it would not simply prove the existence of Bigfoot. It would mean that another branch of the human family had survived in North America into the modern era. It would force archaeologists to reconsider ancient migration. It would force geneticists to investigate an unknown population. It would raise questions about language, intelligence, legal protection, and whether more of these beings were still alive. Snake claimed that they were. He suggested that other members of Dack's kind remained hidden around remote caves and wetlands, living a scavenging existence and avoiding sustained contact with humans. The story had everything a modern mystery needed: a body, a laboratory, an extinct human relative, and the possibility that more creatures were still somewhere in the forest. Then Snake revealed the number that pushed the story out of cryptozoology and into national headlines. According to him, the genetic analysis showed that Dack was 58.5% Neanderthal or Denisovan and 41.5% modern human. The figures were remarkably precise. They also added up perfectly to 100. For believers, this looked like the result they had been waiting for. Bigfoot was not a monster, it was a surviving relative. For skeptics, the numbers created more questions than they answered. Where was the complete report? Who had collected the sample? How had it been stored? Which laboratory had performed each stage of the analysis? What genetic database had been used? And why had one of the largest discoveries in biological history been announced by a man standing beside a fairground display instead of by the institution that supposedly discovered it? The body was no longer the most important piece of evidence. The number was. Because 58.5% sounded scientific. It sounded measurable. It sounded final. But a percentage cannot prove where a sample came from. It cannot reconstruct a broken chain of custody. And it cannot explain why Cornell University had not publicly announced that one of its laboratories had identified an unknown living branch of humanity. The numbers added up perfectly to 100, but almost nothing else about them added up at all. To understand what Dack really was, we would have to stop looking at the body. We would have to follow the DNA.